Smoke rose in dark columns across the ruined battlefield. The ground was broken with fire, steel, and the shattered remains of ships. The silence after the storm of war was heavy, broken only by sparks from burning wrecks. Among the wreckage, a human moved slowly, his steps weak but steady. His name was Daniel, once an engineer on a starship that now lay in ruins behind him. He had no weapon, only burnt hands, blood on his face, and the will to keep walking. Every breath was painful, every step was heavy, but he refused to stop, because stopping meant death, and he was not ready to surrender. Then, through the smoke, he saw her, a figure lying in the dirt, a giant compared to him. She was no ordinary soldier. Her presence still felt powerful, even while broken. An alien warrior, feared across the stars, her golden armor now cracked and scattered around her body. The once shining plates were shattered like glass, sharp fragments glittering in the firelight. Daniel froze, his heart racing. He knew her kind. They were enemies of humankind, fierce, merciless, and proud. He had heard stories that one of their armored champions could destroy entire squads alone. And now one of them lay before him, helpless, bleeding, armor broken beyond repair. For a long moment he did not move. Every instinct told him to walk away. She was the enemy, and even in this state, she might still kill him if she woke. But his eyes saw something else too. Her chest rose and fell weakly, her face pale under blood and dirt. She was alive, but not for long. Daniel knelt down slowly, careful not to make noise. Up close he could see the damage. Her arm was twisted under her, her breathing sharp. The shattered armor that once protected her now cut into her skin like jagged stone. She was dying not from the battle, but from the armor that once made her unstoppable. His mind raced. He could leave her, walk away, survive a little longer alone. But another thought struck him harder. If he walked away, he would be no different than the war that had torn this field apart. If he tried to help, maybe there was a chance, maybe not for victory, but for something better. The human engineer in him spoke, louder than the fear. He pulled off a broken plate of armor and tossed it aside. Her body flinched weakly, but she did not wake. Daniel whispered, almost to himself, "You're not dying like this, not while I can still build." The wreckage around him was a graveyard of machines. But for Daniel, it was also a treasure chest of parts. Metal beams bent, but not useless. Wires burned, but still strong. Fragments of armor still glowing from battle fire. Tools were gone, but his hands were enough, his will sharper than steel. As he worked, his thoughts grew heavier. This alien woman, this enemy, had once been a terror on the battlefield. Now she lay like a fallen statue, her pride broken, her strength fading. But he felt no victory in her weakness, only the weight of choice. Humanity had always survived not by strength alone, but by building, repairing, creating hope from nothing. And maybe, just maybe, that was what he could give her. He looked once more at her face. Her lips moved slightly as if caught in a dream. A single broken word escaped, carried on a weak breath. Why? Daniel's eyes widened. She was not fully conscious, yet some part of her had felt his touch. Not anger, not hate, only confusion. He clenched his jaw and whispered back, "Because you're alive, and that's enough reason." The night around them grew darker. The fires burned lower, but the danger was far from gone. Enemy patrols could arrive at any moment. Scavengers could search the wrecks. He had little time and no guarantee of success. But as Daniel pulled more fragments together, shaping the beginning of something new, he felt the strange rise of hope inside his chest. The battlefield was broken. The war had taken everything. But in the heart of ruin, beside a fallen warrior, one human refused to let death have the final word. The armor was shattered. The warrior was fading. Yet Daniel's hands began the work of forging hope from wreckage. And the story of survival was only beginning. The night sky above the battlefield was silent, but Daniel's heart was not. He sat beside the alien warrior, his hands blackened with soot, his body shaking from exhaustion. Her breathing was shallow, yet steady, each breath like a fragile thread that could break at any moment. Around them, the wreckage of two great armies lay in broken silence, twisted metal and shattered stone reflecting the dim glow of fire. Daniel pressed his hand against a cracked plate of her armor. Once it must have shone like the sun, but now it was useless, a cage of broken shards cutting into her flesh. The enemy had called her the shield of their people, but lying here, she was more fragile than anyone Daniel had ever seen. He wondered how many humans had fallen under her blade, how many ships she had torn apart, and yet, now, she was just a person fighting to breathe. He should have walked away. He should have left her, left this battlefield, tried to reach the mountains or find water before dawn. But something inside him refused to turn his back. Humanity had always survived by repairing, rebuilding, creating, and though this enemy warrior was not human, she deserved a chance to rise again. He whispered to himself, voice rough and low, I will not let the war decide her fate. It was not a promise to her, nor to his people, but to himself, an oath spoken in the ashes of war, stronger than the fear that gripped his chest. Daniel searched the wreckage around him. Pieces of starship hull bent and broken, wires tangled like vines, glass shards glittering in the dust. Every scrap told a story of destruction, yet to Daniel it was raw material. His eyes scanned for anything he could bend, shape, or forge into something new. With a grunt, he pulled free a steel beam, the sound echoing in the still air. The warrior stirred faintly, her lips parting, her eyes twitching beneath closed lids. He froze, heart pounding, expecting her to awaken in fury, to strike him down. But she did not. She only whispered again, broken words in her own tongue, lost to the wind. Daniel exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. He looked at her pale face and said softly, rest, warrior. If you wake, you will see what I build for you. The hours passed slowly. He used the wreckage as his workshop, his burned hands as tools, his will as fire. Sharp plates were filed against stone, wires tied into makeshift cords. Broken armor melted in the flames of burning fuel. The night became alive with sparks as Daniel worked. For every piece he shaped, he thought of her rising again, stronger, alive, not as his enemy, but as someone who owed her survival to a human. Still, doubt gnawed at him. What if she woke and killed him? What if his efforts only gave her strength to destroy again? He paused, sweat dripping down his brow, staring at her motionless form. Yet the oath burned in his chest like a second heartbeat. It was not about what she might do. It was about what he must do. Humanity could not be only destroyers. They had to be saviors too, even when it seemed foolish. Suddenly a noise cut through the night. The crunch of boots on metal, the low growl of voices in the distance. Enemy patrol, searching through the wreckage, hunting for survivors. Daniel's hands froze on the steel plate, his breath caught in his throat. If they found him here, crouched beside their fallen champion, they would kill him without question. He crawled closer to her, shielding her body with his own. The patrol light swept across the field, shadows stretching like claws across the wrecks. He pressed himself into the dirt, heart hammering, whispering under his breath, "Not now, not yet." The footsteps lingered, then faded into the distance, the voices swallowed by the night. Daniel exhaled in relief, but the danger reminded him that time was short. He turned back to her, brushing dust from her cracked armor. In that moment, he realized something strange. She was no longer just an enemy to him. She was a test, a chance to prove that humanity's strength was not in war, but in hope. Even if she never understood, even if she hated him when she woke, his oath would remain true. The flames crackled low as he pressed the first shaped plate into place across her chest. It was rough, unpolished, built from scraps, yet it held together. One piece of armor reborn from wreckage. He whispered, voice trembling but firm, "Piece by piece, I will rebuild what was broken." The dawn began to rise on the horizon, painting the battlefield with cold light. The war had taken everything, yet here, in the ruins, Daniel forged the beginning of something new. A human oath, an alien warrior, and a fragile bond of survival born in silence. The armor was not yet complete, the danger not yet past. But Daniel's choice had been made. He would save her, not because she was friend, not because she was enemy, but because he was human, and humanity builds hope from wreckage. And this was only the first step of his oath. The first light of dawn spread across the battlefield, touching the wreckage with pale, silver glow. Daniel had not slept, his body ached, but his hands did not stop moving. Every broken plate, every twisted shard of metal he touched became part of something greater. From ruin he shaped protection, from wreckage he forged hope. The alien warrior remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Her broken armor, once a symbol of power, now lay scattered around them like fallen crowns. Daniel had managed to piece together fragments across her chest and shoulders. The crude repairs gave her form a shadow of strength once more, though far from perfect. He sat back, wiping sweat and ash from his face. The fire beside him flickered low, feeding on scraps of fuel and cloth. His mind wandered for a moment, drifting into memory. He thought of his home, of the city where his family lived before the war reached them. He remembered repairing toys for his younger brother, building small machines from junk. That same stubbornness was alive in him now, refusing to let broken things stay broken. A soft sound pulled him back. The warrior stirred, her lips parting, her eyes fluttering weakly. For the first time he saw them, glowing faintly like twin embers in the dawnlight. They fixed on him with confusion, with suspicion, and with something deeper. Her voice came out weak, rough, but clear enough. Why human? Daniel froze, his heart pounding. He expected anger, hatred, or even a final attack. But her tone was not filled with rage. It was heavy with disbelief. Why was her enemy touching her armor? Why was her enemy trying to save her? He spoke softly, his voice steady though his chest trembled. Because you are alive, and life is worth saving. Her lips tightened, as if she wanted to reject the words, but no strength came. Her eyes closed again, yet a single whisper escaped. Fool. Daniel let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. Maybe he was a fool, but better a fool who built than a coward who walked away. He turned back to the wreckage, pulling another twisted plate from the dirt. His oath remained clear, and her brief awakening only made it stronger. The day grew hotter as the sun climbed. Shadows stretched across the field. The wrecks gleamed like bones of giants. Daniel worked in silence, cutting, bending, and hammering with stone and fire. Each strike echoed with purpose. Each spark flew like a promise. Slowly the pieces began to form, rough but strong, crude but protective. At times he stopped to check her breathing. At times he placed a hand near her throat to feel the faint rhythm of life. Every sign that she still lived gave him strength. Every whisper of her fragile heart pushed his hands to move faster. But as the hours passed, danger returned. From beyond the ridge, Daniel heard the distant hum of patrol ships. Enemy scouts were searching the ruins again, their machines scanning for survivors. He knew if they found him here, his oath would end in fire and blood. He hid her beneath a sheet of broken hull, covering the glowing fragments of armor, then pressed himself flat into the dirt, holding his breath as the ships passed. The hum grew louder, then faded into silence, leaving only the wind. Daniel crawled back to her side. Her lips moved again, a whisper so faint he leaned close to hear. You repair. He smiled despite the fear still in his chest. Yes, I repair. It's what humans do. Her eyes flickered open once more, confusion softening into something strange. Perhaps she had never seen her enemies like this, not destroyers, but builders. Hours turned to evening, and Daniel's creation neared its shape. The armor was rough, mismatched, forged from wreckage, but it held together. Piece by piece, he rebuilt her shield, stronger not because of its metal, but because of the will that forged it, the oath that kept his hands moving. When the last plate was set, Daniel sat back, his breath heavy, his hands bleeding. He looked at her once more, whispering to himself, "Your people may call me enemy, but I will give you strength again." For a long moment he stared at the warrior, then at the stars beyond the smoke. The war had broken everything, but in this small act, in these forged plates, he felt the spark of something greater. The alien warrior remained silent, her body still weak, her eyes closed once again. But her chest rose and fell with steadier rhythm now. The armor, though crude, no longer cut into her skin. It held her together instead of breaking her. Daniel touched the metal lightly, as if sealing the oath once more. Forged from wreckage, born from fire, this armor will carry you again. Night began to fall, stars slowly returning to the sky. The battlefield was quiet once more. But in the ruins, beside an enemy, Daniel had built not just protection. He had built hope, fragile but alive, glowing like a small flame against the endless dark. And deep in her fading dreams, the alien warrior whispered a single word, not in her tongue, but in his broken but clear, human. Night wrapped the battlefield in shadow. The fires had burned low, but their glow still painted the wreckage in red and gold. Daniel sat close to the alien warrior, his back pressed against a broken engine, his hands raw from hours of work. The makeshift armor he had forged clung to her body now, rough but steady, holding her together like a second skin. Every time he looked at it, he felt the weight of his oath, the choice he had made in the ashes. The warrior stirred, her eyes opening slowly, glowing faint in the dark. She studied him in silence, her breathing heavy, her face pale, yet her gaze carried the strength of someone who had never bowed. Daniel shifted uneasily under her stare, unsure if she would see him as savior or fool. Finally she spoke, her voice a broken whisper. "You build." He nodded, keeping his voice low. "I build because it is the only way forward." Her brow furrowed as if the words confused her, her lips pressed tightly. Then she whispered again, "Enemy, why?" Daniel looked down at his burned hands, at the fragments of steel beneath his nails, then back at her. "Because hope is stronger than fear," he said simply. Her eyes narrowed, but she did not argue. Instead, she leaned her head back against the wreckage and closed her eyes. It was not trust, but it was not rejection either. It was the space between fragile and dangerous. Daniel took a slow breath, his heart still pounding. The night was not safe. He could hear the distant hum of machines, the voices of enemy scouts echoing faintly through the ruins. At any moment, they could find him, find her, and the fragile thread between them would break in blood. He doused the fire with dirt, plunging them into near darkness, leaving only the cold shine of stars above. As the silence deepened, he worked again, reshaping a plate of metal, reinforcing her shoulder where the bone seemed weakest. She watched him with half-closed eyes, her expression unreadable. When he stumbled from exhaustion, her lips moved, whispering, "Human, foolish." Daniel gave a tired laugh. Maybe, but foolish hands still mend what is broken. Hours dragged by, danger pressing at the edges of the night. Twice enemy patrols passed close, lights cutting across the battlefield like blades. Daniel pressed himself flat in the dirt, his body shielding hers. The warrior's eyes flickered open, watching him protect her without hesitation. It was the first time she felt something unfamiliar stir inside her chest, a flicker of respect. When the patrols moved on, Daniel rose again, shaking from the near discovery. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Why risk death for me?" Daniel did not look at her, his hands busy tightening a cord across her side. "Because survival alone is not enough," he murmured. "We have to be more than that." The words lingered between them, carried by the cold night air. She said nothing more, but her silence was no longer filled with doubt. It was heavy with thought. Later, As the sky began to pale with the first touch of dawn, Daniel leaned back, his body trembling with fatigue. The warrior, still weak, shifted slowly, testing the weight of the new armor on her body. It held, rough and uneven, but strong enough to keep her breathing steady. Her hand brushed across one of the forged plates, her fingers tracing the strange, human design. She looked at him with eyes sharper now, no longer just the gaze of a dying soldier, but of a warrior awakening. "You make armor," she said, her voice firmer. "I forge hope," he answered, his tone steady. She studied him, the corner of her mouth twitching as if she almost smiled, though it never formed. Instead, she closed her eyes again and whispered, "Strange human." Daniel allowed himself a small grin, though weariness pulled at his bones. Strange or not, his oath was alive, stronger with every piece of armor shaped, with every word exchanged. And though trust had not yet been spoken, he felt it beginning to take root in the silence between them. The battlefield was still dangerous, the war still raged beyond the horizon. But here, beside the wreckage, among fire and ash, two enemies had begun to share something neither had expected. Not peace, not yet, but the fragile beginning of trust. And in that trust, forged in the flames of war, a bond stronger than steel was starting to rise. The second dawn rose over the battlefield, washing the ruins in pale light. Daniel woke from shallow sleep, his body stiff, his hands sore, but his mind still sharp. Beside him, the alien warrior lay with her new armor, the crude plates shaped by his hands, glowing faintly in the sunlight. For the first time since he found her, she did not look like a dying statue, but like a warrior resting before the next battle. She opened her eyes slowly, the glow within them brighter now, more alive. Her gaze fell on Daniel, who was already sifting through the wreckage for more parts. "You do not stop?" she whispered, her voice still weak, but stronger than before. Daniel looked at her with a tired smile. "Hope doesn't stop. It keeps moving until it breaks through." Her lips pressed together, the words foreign to her. Among her people, warriors did not rely on others. Warriors stood or fell by their own strength. To be rebuilt by an enemy, to be shielded by one, it was unthinkable. Yet the plates on her body told her the truth. She was alive because of him. Daniel returned with a strip of scorched wiring, bending it into a clasp for her arm. She studied him silently, noting how his hands shook but did not falter. Finally she asked, "Why do you care if I live?" Daniel paused, his voice low, steady, because life is not meant to be measured by sides, only by its worth. Her chest rose sharply at his words, something inside her shifting. All her life, she had believed in strength, in loyalty to her people, in hatred for his kind. But this human was strange, weak in body, yet strong in a way she could not name. When he touched the armor, it was not for power, but for protection, not for war, but for hope. As the day passed, the sounds of distant battle echoed across the sky. Explosions rumbled on the horizon, shaking the ground beneath them. Daniel worked faster, knowing their safety was fragile, knowing patrols could return at any moment. The warrior's eyes followed his every move. She began to see the rhythm in his actions, the way he shaped steel like a musician shaping song. At last she spoke again, her tone quieter, thoughtful. "In my world, no warrior accepts help. We fight alone, we die alone." Daniel tightened the wire on her shoulder, then met her gaze. "Then maybe your world needs to change," he replied, his eyes fierce though his body trembled. The words cut deeper than any blade. Her people would have laughed at such weakness, but she felt no laughter in her chest. Instead, she felt the weight of truth, for even the strongest armor could shatter. Even the proudest warrior could fall. And here, in the dirt and ash, she was alive because one human refused to let her die. Later, as the sun sank and shadows stretched across the wreckage, she tested her strength, pushing herself up on one arm, her body shaking but holding. Daniel rushed to steady her, his hand gripping hers, his eyes wide with relief. For the first time, she felt the warmth of human flesh against her own, rough, scarred but steady. The contact startled her, yet she did not pull away. Her kind never touched outsiders, never let an enemy so close. But there in the silence, she realized the bond between them was no longer just of armor and steel. It was something alive, forged in trust, born in shared struggle. Her eyes softened, and she whispered, "If I rise again, it will be because of you." Daniel swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing deep into his chest. He wanted to answer, but no words came, only a quiet nod. Night returned, and with it the danger of patrols. Daniel kept watch with a piece of twisted metal as a weapon, his body tense but ready. The warrior watched him from the shadows, her heart stirring with something she could not name. He was fragile, breakable, yet he stood guard as if nothing could move him. She had been taught that humans were weak, but in Daniel she saw a strength different from her people. Not the strength of muscle, not the strength of armor, but the strength of will. The bond of steel he forged for her was real, but the bond of flesh, the bond of trust, was stronger still. And though war still raged beyond the horizon, though the night was filled with danger, in the wreckage, in the silence between two enemies, something greater was being born, a bond neither of them expected, a bond that would change them both. The night was long, but dawn came fast. Daniel sat awake, his eyes heavy, but his grip tight on the metal shard he carried as a weapon. The alien warrior rested against the wreckage, her breathing stronger now, her body held firm by the armor he had forged. She no longer looked like a fallen statue. She looked like a flame struggling to rise again. The first rays of sunlight cut across the battlefield, and with them came danger. Engines roared in the distance, the harsh hum of machines rolling closer. Enemy patrols were returning, not just scouts this time, but soldiers. Daniel's heart sank. He knew hiding would not be enough, not with their numbers, not with their weapons. The warrior opened her eyes, her senses sharp. She looked at Daniel, then at the horizon where dust clouds grew. Her voice was steady though weak. "They come." Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "Then we stand." He wanted to protect her, but deep inside he knew she was no ordinary soldier. Even wounded, even weak, she was still a warrior forged by battle. And now with the armor reforged by his hands, she had a chance. Together, they might survive. The rumble grew louder, shadows of soldiers moving between broken ships. Daniel helped her to her feet, his arm around her waist. She staggered, her legs trembling, but she did not fall. Her hand clenched into a fist, her eyes burned with fire. When the enemy patrol saw them, shouts echoed, weapons raised. Blinding light beams cut across the wreckage, searching, hunting. Daniel raised a shard of metal, his hands shaking. But before he could move, the warrior stepped forward, her body shielding him. The forged armor shone faintly, patched and uneven, but strong. It caught the first blast of fire, sparks flying as energy slammed into the plates. She did not fall. She held her ground, the force of the strike shaking her, but not breaking her. Her roar filled the battlefield, deep and powerful, a sound of defiance. Daniel's eyes widened, awe and fear mixing. The armor he had built was holding, his work was alive in her stand. For the first time he saw his effort not as scraps of steel, but as strength reborn. She was a warrior again, and she was standing beside him, not against him. The soldiers closed in, their weapons ready, their voices shouting in command. Daniel crouched low, his breath fast, his mind screaming for escape. But the warrior turned to him, her eyes fierce, her voice sharp. "Stay with me." Before he could answer, she charged. Her movement was slower than before, but the strength in her body was real. She crashed into the first soldier, her fist breaking his weapon apart. The armor sparked, but held as another strike hit her side. Daniel shouted, swinging his shard of metal, catching an enemy across the arm. Together they fought, not as enemies, but as allies. The human with his desperate courage, the alien with her reborn strength. Every clash was survival. Every strike was proof of their fragile bond. And in the chaos, Daniel felt something strange. He was not afraid. Not completely. He trusted her, and she trusted him. The battle raged through the ruins, fire and steel colliding. The patrol shouted for reinforcements, but fear was already spreading. Their champion had risen again, her broken armor reforged, her spirit unbroken. And beside her stood a human, a symbol of defiance. At the height of the clash, one soldier aimed for Daniel. The shot came fast, blinding in the smoke. Daniel froze, knowing he could not move in time. But the warrior threw herself in front of him, the blast striking her chest. The armor cracked, sparks bursting, but it did not shatter. She staggered, blood running from her lips, yet she stayed on her feet. Her voice thundered across the field, "No more." With a final strike, she broke through their line, forcing the soldiers to retreat into the distance. The battlefield fell silent again, save for the crackle of flames and Daniel's heavy breathing. He rushed to her side, catching her as she fell to her knees. Her body shook, her breath ragged, but she smiled faintly. "You gave me strength," she whispered. Daniel held her tightly, his voice low. "No, you carried it inside you. I only gave it shape." The war was not over. The enemy would return, stronger and in greater numbers. But in that moment, on that broken field, they had won. Not just survival, but trust, not just defense, but a bond forged in fire. And as Daniel looked into her glowing eyes, he knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about survival. It was about standing together. The return to the fight had begun, and together they would not fall. The battlefield was quiet at last. Ash drifted like snow across the broken ground, carried by the soft morning wind. Daniel sat with the warrior resting against him, her weight heavy but alive, her breath rough but steady. The crude armor he had forged was cracked in places, scorched by enemy fire, yet it still held her together. And in that moment he knew the work of his hands had not been wasted. She opened her eyes slowly, the glow faint but unbroken. Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment before she spoke, her voice low. "You saved me, human." Daniel shook his head, his own voice trembling. "No, you saved yourself. I only gave you the chance." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close, strange words, but true. For the first time since the war had begun, Daniel felt something other than fear. He felt the quiet weight of respect, not for victory, but for survival, for the bond forged in fire. The warrior pushed herself up, her body shaking, her strength returning slowly. She stood tall once again, not as a broken champion, but as something new. Her hand pressed against the rough armor, her eyes shining with pride and something softer. The horizon glowed with golden light as the sun climbed higher. The fires of battle were dying, smoke lifting into the sky. In that silence, Daniel realized the world had changed, even if only here in this small place. Enemies had become allies, strangers had become bound. And from wreckage, hope had been born. The warrior turned to him, her voice stronger now. "In my people's law, no warrior bows to another, no warrior accepts debt." She paused, her glowing eyes fixed on his. "But today I bow to you." Before he could respond, she lowered herself to one knee, her hand pressed to the dirt, her head bowed. Not in defeat, not in submission, but in respect. Daniel's breath caught, his chest tightening. He had never imagined this moment, never imagined an alien warrior of legend kneeling before him. He reached down, lifting her up gently, his voice firm. "You don't bow to me, you stand with me." Her eyes widened slightly, and this time the hint of a smile broke through. "Then we stand together," she whispered. They looked to the sky, where distant ships still moved like shadows. The war was far from over. The enemy would return, and greater battles still waited. But neither of them felt alone anymore. They had found something stronger than fear, stronger than war itself. As the light grew brighter, Daniel gathered what little he could carry. The warrior steadied herself beside him, her armor battered but alive. Each step she took was a promise that she was not finished. Each step he took beside her was a promise that he would not leave her. Together, they walked away from the wreckage. The ruins behind them burned in silence, a graveyard of war. But ahead, the path was open, a road unknown, filled with danger, but also filled with possibility. Daniel glanced at her, his voice quiet. "Where do we go from here?" She answered without hesitation. "To where the fight is, but this time we fight together." The human and the alien, once enemies, now bound by steel and trust, moved into the dawn. The war still raged across the stars, but in this moment, a different kind of victory had been won. Not of weapons, not of destruction, but of survival, respect, and hope. And as Daniel looked at the rising sun, he knew the galaxy itself would change because of what was forged here. Her armor was shattered, but remade. Her pride was broken, but reborn. And at her side walked a human who had turned wreckage into hope. The story of their survival was not the end, but the beginning of something greater. The dawn was new, and so was the bond they carried into it.